Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and we have our one famous speaker, Professor David Smith. He's one of the famous speaker, and he has a lot of experience from Industry 4.0. And we will discuss about industry, the new cobotics paradigm. Professor David Smith, how you want to analyze?
Thank you so much again, Sharif. This is a very interesting topic, particularly when you take it and look at it in context of Industry 4.0, and where Industry 4.0 is really trying to look at new paradigms and where it can be done and those things it can be done with. Um, Cobots are very interesting because what a cobot is it's a collaborative robot. And collaborative robot is a great way to begin to balance things and use them. Uh, it kind of like is looking at the differences between having robots do the work itself versus you, the human, working with the machine, putting the elements together around the machines, and working that way. One second. The use of the robot, though, is very interesting. It's used in the cobot approach is used in industry, it's used in medicine, it's used in gaming, and there's a lot of games where robots are combined to work collaboratively with you. So these collaborative robots or cobots are designed to operate around people and with people. And they are particularly good looking at some of the menial tasks, which are repetitive and are ones that require greater strength or actually greater precision than a human can do. And it really is a way to help augment the human capital that is being used to uh, do the task and do them in a way that a human by themselves cannot do it. The other thing that's really interesting with cobots is that because they, particularly in highly repetitive work, they don't slow down or speed up as a human would throughout the day. They really keep a constant speed, they keep constant functionality, which gives you a much more predictable output, uh, helps you meet your timetable in ways, and really helps you begin to look at the elements of where you can leverage the human capability and the machine capability by sharing what you're doing. And I think the sharing of them is really the new paradigm that we see emerging with these. Um, Sorry, my computer just did something weird. Uh, I think I'm back. It really is looking at, as opposed to classic automation, where classic automation is the transfer of skills from a human to machine. Cobotics is really the sharing of those skills. And it's the role of the machine being able to assist rather than replace the human being in the tasks that are being done. And the sharing of functionality actually helps you manage a whole lot of the fears of robots in the workplace. And the collaborative approach is one where you work hand in hand to accomplish the task. Very much used in manufacturing, particularly in manufacturing where the tasks are repetitive. But to me, some of the more interesting uses are places, for example, in medicine, where you use collaborative robots with you, for example, to do complex surgery or to do minimally invasive surgery or to do surgery at a distance, where you're working with a collaborative robot at the distance. And things like the Da Vinci surgical centers are great examples of a cobot being used at the distance to begin to work together. It is an area where It also can be used to transfer skills. It can be able to transfer skills easily into new environments, into new countries, into new factories. But it's also a great augmentation because once a user has trained the collaborative robot with them, and say the human being leaves, it's easier to bring in a replacement because part of the training is already done. So the machine, the robot, will help train the new human being to collaborate with it and work with it. So high level, that's an introduction to collaborative robots or cobots.
Thank you, Mr. Markley. You are from entertainment industry. What do you think about this new cobotic approach and industry 4.0 development?
Well, I mean, a lot of entertainment people are looking at not so much robots, but they're definitely looking at holographic performances and other things that would fall in that AR kind of idea and everything. Most of the people I know that are in the performance space are not necessarily wanting to have robots play the roles or robots do the songs or things of that nature. But definitely, if there are legendary performers that are gone, then there are ways that they're performance capabilities can be put out there and we can get a chance to see them perform even after they're gone. I know that that was definitely a case with both Prince and Michael Jackson shortly after they passed away and everything. And I'm sure that some of the other legends that have since gone, that is one of the things that is going on, is that you're able to have a chance to have them have their performance space, whether it's with a robot or whether it's with AR or VR. And a lot of times we go through different technological ages. I know that we went from like the agricultural age to like the industrial age, and from the industrial to the technological age. And some people would say that this is almost like a post-technological age and things along those lines. So it definitely opens up life for a lot of people to do more of the leisure things that they would like. But then at the same time, and I'm curious to see what David's thoughts are about this, you don't want it to be in such a way that humans become unnecessary in the whole chain of events. And of course, you do need humans to program the computers, but we don't want it to get to that kind of a dystopian view where the only thing that humans are doing is kind of like laying around the house and not doing anything productive and things along those lines. So I do know that that is one of the fears that sometimes folks have when they hear that computers are doing more and more. But as has been stated on this show before, that's not happening to that extreme yet, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't happen at some point or another, depending on what the folks that are in charge, and particularly those that might be considered technocrats, feel like doing about that. But definitely, I know that that is something that just the layman is always concerned about. But definitely, it is definitely being used in the entertainment industry in the sense of some of the jobs that are very difficult to do. I remember that years ago, there was a Cinefest, one of our street festivals, and there were these kind of like people that were picked up from different parts of the world to do some of that grift work and some of that hard labor that goes on, whether it's at a music festival or whether it's at a movie set or things along those lines. And some of those jobs were not the most sought after jobs and things of that nature. As a matter of fact, I remember one gentleman got some folks from Australia, and they would do some of the climbing up those rigs to set up things and all of that. But definitely, I imagine that some of those jobs that are less than considered jobs that people want to go into on a regular basis, the robot would probably be more efficient and would probably be something that might replace some of those jobs. And if we're not getting the workforce for those jobs, then I have no problem with the robot getting the job as well, because a lot of times these are difficult jobs that humans don't want to necessarily do, and things along those lines. So definitely that might open it up for people to have more of the robotic system going in there and doing those difficult jobs. Because I can tell you, as one that has not necessarily done that work, but have had friends that have done that work, that it is not the most easiest jobs in the world. So, like I said, everybody talks about the fun side of the entertainment industry, but there are some jobs in there that are not as easy. And if you ever go to a movie set, you'll see what some of those jobs are. And definitely, if you ever go to a concert, and they'll pay attention to the behind the scenes stuff. A lot of times you don't see that because by the time you get to the concert, that's already been done. But if you can imagine that if you've been to a concert, even at an arena, and you see that fancy stage, somebody had to put that stage up, and it's not always an easy job. So that's where robots might be able to come in more handy and all of that. But I'd love to hear David's thoughts about that.
Thank you. Professor David Smith, how cobotic can help enhance human capacity?
Yeah, actually, I kind of like what Mark said, because what Mark doesn't know, and actually you probably don't know, Sharif, is that in my early misguided youth, I actually was a roadie
Mm-hmm.
on concert tours with a couple of the big bands back there. And you're right, flying speakers, putting up the rigs to fly the lines and adjust the lines and things were actually kind of fun back then. But I was a lot younger. So you see those, but Sharif, where you begin to see some of the things you're talking about and what they're doing is really amazing. Just to give you a data point, though, is in 2019, the Cobalt robots, collaborative robots, uh, market cap was about $980 million. And it's predicted that by 2025, that will go from 980 million to $7.2 billion. So that's quite a big change, and it's a compound annual growth rate of over 40%. So you're seeing that. And what has some of those big changes that you're referring to, Sharif? One of the big changes is that there's all these new generation of robots that can be used for different applications. Robots that can stand and walk, robots that can grab things, and just like we can with our hand, but robots that can do more movements, more articulations than we can. So they could really be used for performing more complex tasks. It's kind of interesting. If I go back to 2013, uh, the majority of the robots that were collaborating with humans were in the automotive industry. And then, that makes sense, where they can do welding, where they can put parts together, put engines on, doors in, and stuff. And China, Japan, Germany really have the largest market share of this type of robots. But the big shift today is that these collaborative robots are moving into many, many more areas, like we talked about before: entertainment. They're moving into medicine. They're moving even into retail and other areas like that, where you see these collaborative robots working with each other. I have mentioned in a couple of earlier broadcasts, one of the ones that's surprising me a lot, and this is, I think, a COVID uh, enhanced acceleration, is cobots being used in restaurants, where they're being used to back in the kitchen in the back end, but they're also being used to bring food from the kitchen area out to the servers in the dining room, so that the servers do not have to run back and forth. And because, at least here, we have a real workage shortage in that area, it really lets the people be able to do more with the humans in the dining room versus going back and forth, and is an excellent example of where robots collaborate with others uh, to do work. And what's the other element on this is, because of this new advance into industries outside of the automotive industry and these others, we're seeing the price of the cobots really go down and down and be able to work that way. But the collaborative robot is mainly designed to interact with humans in shared workspaces. And we're seeing that not only the big companies, but small, medium sized enterprises now. And it really is changing what we're doing, and going from places where it was primarily an industrial task to being used in entertainment, to being used in retail, to being able to use in the food industry, is a very big shift. And these advancements are going at a remarkable level. And I'm seeing new applications every day coming out into places where I track and follow.
Hey, David, do you think we'll ever get to the point where the robots are as easily available as, say, a vacuum cleaner, where somebody can get a robot that is in, say, a project area or in an area that is a poor area, versus right now when it's probably more geared toward those that would be considered middle class and even high income? But do you think we'll ever get to the point that it'll be available to the common citizen?
Well, I think it really is already today. Uh, Let me give you a good example, and this is one that you might not agree with me on, but the Roomba and the robotic vacuum cleaners
Mhm.
are cobots,
Right.
and they're working together with you in millions of homes today. But the
Okay.
other trend that I think is very interesting with it, and let me see if I can pull one up, is cobots are used in games now, and there's a lot of cobots coming out as games. And I can go today and buy these and have the kids not only learn about robots, but they can play role playing with them. They can do other elements like that. So cobots can actually be a teaching tool. And the price points for these are around the $50 to $100 range.
Yeah.
So it really has changed. And when Sharif talked about the new paradigm, that's to me where you see cobots being the new paradigm, because industrial robots have been in use since the late 70s. And this new paradigm is really seeing them in all these new verticals, all these new applications, and the ability to do where industrial robots you had to have an advanced engineer and probably an advanced software engineer come in to program them. These are things that a 6-year-old kid can do with the new Cobalt games, for example.
I guess the flip side of that, though, would be if they become too readily available. Because I was just reading an article not that long ago about Tesla. I know they've been doing a lot of work around the autopilot and getting their cars to move and all of that. But apparently, some of those Tesla drivers that are doing that testing are also playing video games on their dashboards while they're being driven around and all of that. So apparently, that's throwing a lot of people. And I think there was a recent article about that in the New York Times. So I guess that would be the flip side. And if the car is a self-driving car, then you've got time to play video games. And even though you're supposed to be, even though the car is doing the driving, you still need to pay attention to the car doing the driving, or the robot that's driving the system, to make sure that it is taking you where you want to go. But if you're being distracted by a video game, no telling what might happen on the road.
Well, Mark, that's actually, we passed that road a long time ago. How often do you fly on commercial airplanes?
Yeah, not
I
enough,
mean,
but I've been on them. Yeah,
most of the time, the pilots are doing other things because they're on autopilot.
right.
And the airplanes today have even advanced to where you can have the autopilots land planes.
Mm.
And actually some of the smoother landings you get are not the ones that the pilots do, but the ones that the computers do. And the Airbus is actually a great example of where they've converted years ago to fly by wire and fly by automation. And an Airbus plane can take off by using automation, it can land by automation, and yes, it can fly between the destinations. Now, the pilots on landings and takeoff are really intense there and will take over. But in the middle of those flights where you're flying around at 36,000 feet, now the pilots are reading books, they're playing games, they're studying, they're taking classes. So, we've passed that bridge.
Right.
And to me, that's one of the interesting things is these
Right.
become more intelligent the more you do it and more learning. And Tesla's an example is that he tried to go too fast
Mm.
with the automation in the Tesla car. And so they pulled back and they're now introducing things incrementally
Yeah.
instead of big bites like they did before. And they're refining them. As they see the feedback, some of these will actually pull back because maybe they were going too fast. And I've seen that. Uh, and you're going to see that particularly moving fast in using cobots to deliver products in industry. We've already talked
Mhm.
about how trucking industries, one of them, long haul, is beginning to go to a cobotics type of approach. And we're seeing it now with local deliveries too. And we talked about how Walmart uh, in Arkansas is using the local delivery box trucks, which are totally autonomous with no human in it. Where I personally believe for that type of delivery, a cobotics approach where you have a human in the truck as well as the robot driving the truck, I believe that's a better approach, just me personally.
So I got to get. So instead of getting my personal pizza delivered, I should expect that drone delivery shortly. Because so far I'm still getting regular humans delivering the pizza whenever I decide to order a pizza out and everything. But you're thinking that it might be a drone delivery in the next year or two.
Actually, I've already gotten one pizza by drone delivery, so yes,
Well,
Yes, I think in the drone actually even in Malaysia, Singapore, they're heavily utilizing drone,
they
not
are.
only for delivery, even for securities, like border securities, solving these COVID situations, especially that they are like tracking the area where actually the COVID patients and many things actually, even in Malaysia and Singapore, they're heavily utilizing this drone technology. So beside that, one thing I have in mind, example, the more we depended on technology, let's say we are developing different robot, artificial intelligence, drone technology, and other things. Do you think that we can utilize human intelligence properly, or what do you think? What do you think? Especially from my perspective, I saw that the young populations, especially their involvement with, example, sports, involvement with different creative activities, example, debatings, involvement with different kind of hackathons, like this kind of activities actually decreasing. They are heavily involved with social media.
Yeah, the two you're talking about are great examples and how COVID really changed it. Before COVID, I was involved with multiple hackathons, multiple things like that. I'm a judge for one of the big robotic competitions in schools in the United States at local, state, and national level, uh, First USA. And they've canceled now recently for the second year their competitions.
right.
The kids are still in the robotic clubs in the high school, in the middle schools, but they are no longer doing the competitions like they did before because of COVID. And in some ways, I think that's really unfortunate
Yeah.
because uh, collaboration is still the way to advance your knowledge and your capabilities more rapidly than before. And to me, with cobotics, that is actually a great example of a collaboration and a collaborative approach because it's not robots doing it themselves. It's the place where the human and the robot are working together to accomplish things. And, we talked about the fully autonomous cars and stuff. Well, that's really not a cobot. The fully autonomous is actually a robot doing the work, and it's not collaborating with the human. The human is just there as a passenger. But as we see the other ones, they are collaborating. And you can see it back even when it was not robots. I mean, if I were to go and get bricks delivered to my house, shingles delivered to my house, pallets of grass delivered to my house, the humans don't unload it from the truck. They have these mechanical dollies and the mechanical lift arms that are delivering it, which is a cobotics type of approach that is used for that particular part of the operation. So we see them even more widespread than we think about. Because when you first think about cobotics and that it's the new paradigm, it's actually one that has been changing over time at different levels for quite a while. And the big difference is that the cobots today are more intelligent. And once you teach them stuff, they can work with you to do things instead of you having to instruct them every time or having to have that expert come in and program it. And if you need to change the program, you have to bring the experts back in, which is the industrial robot, the old industrial robots,
Okay.
because the people working with them on the manufacturing line, for example, could not modify the program. So it did one thing, did it really well, but then you had to have experts come back in to program it, where cobotics is the approach, where it's collaborating with the human in real time. So I think that's part of it, but COVID did definitely accelerate the use of collaborative robots, and I'm actually looking forward to adding more to my uh, household. Even there, we I mentioned Rumba, which was really a vacuum cleaner. There's now ones out that will wet mop and vacuum up
Hmm.
hard floors, which I can tell you, I actually enjoyed vacuuming the carpet more than mopping the floor. So I'm kind of wanting that one that does the wet mopping and drying it up, because that was a task I always hated. And if I can work with a cobot to do that, I'm going to tell you, sign me up.
Yeah, that makes a lot
Okay.
of sense and everything. The This might be one of those areas that the um, second world nations and even to some degree the third world nations may have a slight advantage over the industrialized nations and the what some people might consider first world or whatever, because unfortunately I do have friends and family in the education system. We for years have been teaching to the test, and we continue to teach to the test and things along those lines, and a lot of times things that we should be developing in our school system, in my opinion, and I don't know whether David would agree with me, don't get the kind of attention that they should get, in the sense of like STEAM and STEAM topics and things along those lines as a kind of across the board kind of education, because this is one of those areas that I feel needs some definite improvement at, particularly here in the United States, but I would even argue other parts of the so-called developed nations as well, even though I understand that places like Switzerland and maybe even Germany are doing a good job of getting their youth involved in uh, technology and in STEAM at a very early age, even, because that is one of my concerns. I have nephews that are 12 and 13, and I did notice that during Thanksgiving they were spending time on their Oculus set, which is, and to some degree, a robotics device as well. So definitely that was good that they were getting involved in that. But how much of that was just them escaping into their own virtual fantasies or things of that, and how much of it was being used for educational purposes. I'll have to talk to my younger brother and find out how much of that is going on, because I know a lot of times it's just an escape mechanism as well. So, like I said, I know it can be used for educational purposes, but it's just a matter of the parents kind of making a point to have that happen. So that's one of the things that I would be curious about and all of that. I was going to just teasingly ask David, when he got that drone pizza delivered, because I haven't had a drone pizza delivered yet, did he tip the drone?
Well, fortunately, that did not happen. And even in the restaurant, uh, where the robots are working with the human server, a part of me goes, well, do I have to tip the a robot there as well?
Right.
Uh, and we're seeing that. And again, I'm going back to COVID here, because COVID has even changed tipping the way you just mentioned it,
Right.
because they're now. I was reading these articles last week that if you're doing pickup or go to the restaurant and have them bring the food out to your car, they're now saying tip 10 to 15% there, and to the human inside the restaurant, instead of tipping 15%, they're saying now tip 25%
Right.
and stuff. And these are COVID recommendations from there. But COVID has affected a lot, and the whole area of collaborative robots is one that we're going to see very much so, because one of the growth areas I've seen in the early science now is the use of cobots in the kitchen,
Mm.
and seeing that on some of the industrial ranges, they're putting a cobot arm on it, and letting it do the things, and have the chef really be the ones who put the ingredients over there to put into it. But in some ways, again, that kind of makes sense, because once you learn how to cook something,
Right.
it should become a repetitive process,
Right.
so that your quality is close to the same every time. And I can see that really going there. And I love the question that came up there too. What some of the major challenges? Some of the major challenges is privacy,
Hmm.
and privacy is one that, as you begin to do that, and the amount of sensors that are required in these cobots are collecting a lot more information than just the task which is at hand. If you think about a Roomba as a cobot that we can think of in our houses, it can tell me where the furniture is. The sensors in there can tell me, do you have pets? Do you have a child who is crawling on the floor who has to get out of the way of it, or it has to avoid it? Uh, the sensors on it are LiDAR, they're radar, they're thermal. I can collect a lot of information with those.
Hmm.
And so the privacy is a big one all the way around. The privacy, as you mentioned earlier, Mark, in an autonomous vehicle.
Hmm.
Well, the robots in it know more about where we're going and what we're doing than probably we even do,
Right.
because it's collecting more information about where we go and what we do and how we do it. Do we drive too fast? Do we uh, run yellow lights? Where it's interesting, because a properly trained autonomous vehicle will not run a red light.
Hmm.
So it's going to be a different way there, is because the other big challenge is ethics.
Right.
And, we're seeing that anywhere artificial intelligence is used, and there has to be some artificial intelligence use of cobots. Now, the opportunities are also really great on the other side, and particularly in places where you're moving from the third industrial age into the fourth, where you're beginning to do this, you're going to see more opportunities for it. The other big thing you're going to see cobots with, and this is again another COVID consequence, is COVID taught us very well that we cannot rely on large manufacturing suppliers which are distant. We're right now in the United States, we have hundreds of cargo ships lined up on each coast who cannot be unloaded now because of things like that. We saw early on that our reliance on manufacturing in China really hurt people. And so you're seeing a move from these very large manufacturing, for example, in China, where that manufacturing capability is being distributed back to regions, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah. I guess.
And Sharif, the question that just came up, uh, that one, why the industry manufacturing must have robots? It doesn't must have robots, but what robots do is it frees the human from doing things that are really hard to do. For example, picking up a a motor in a truck, and trying to position it in the truck. I would rather have a robot helping me with that than taking two guys and try to do that every time. Uh, being able to make 1,000 welds on an automobile body by hand versus having a robot do those welds and hit it uh, is there. Robots in manufacturing often are used where there's safety considerations.
Right.
And I'd rather have a robot take the risk than me lose a finger, a hand, things in that type of manufacturing as well. But the real trick I think in it is why I like the cobots is again, it's a collaboration between the human and the machine, and not the machine totally replacing the human.
Along those same lines, I know that in West Virginia and in some areas that were doing some very heavy mining that, like you said, was very dangerous. They have been using more robots because of the fact that those were some very dangerous jobs in the sense of coal mining and things like that. So they would have the robots or the robotic figures go down there versus a man that may suffer either a disease at some point or another, because a lot of times you can collect black dust and things along those lines, or they might, and it may not be immediate, but there were also some great disasters that happened as well. And coal mining is just one example. I know there have been some other ones also. But the flip side of that, I don't know what both either you or Sharif think about this, but there's been a real push, and I know it's COVID related, for people, we as humans, as a basic entity, are very social creatures. We love hanging out with our friends, hanging out with our family, things of that nature. But we've seen almost a push against that, and a lot of that is because of COVID. But I'm also wondering if the technology isn't helping with that as well, because a lot of people are going like, I don't want to go into my office setting. I don't want to go back to the office. I mean, there's like some high percentages that are saying you can open the doors all day long if you want to, but if I can do it from my house on my laptop or my desktop, I'm going to do it here. And I'm going to do it in a more confined kind of environment in the sense of my immediate family and maybe my neighbors, but not as much socialization, particularly with strangers and people that you have in that work environment. So I'm wondering if some of this ease isn't giving us the not so much the necessity, but the feeling that we can do it without having to go into those office settings or even the academic settings. Because I know some universities that are having similar kind of things where the students are much rather learning from their dorm rooms or in their apartments if they live in apartments versus going to the classrooms. And I'm actually wondering if some of these universities might wind up having dormant spaces because they have to close down some of their offices. And I brought that up before and everything. But David, you do some teaching. What is your thought about that, about the ease of technology and how it's kind of drawn us in? And like I said, I know some of this is COVID related, but I don't think that it is exclusively COVID related.
Well, I think you're talking about a good point. I mean, not far from me is Dell Computers headquarters,
Mm-hmm.
and Dell their campus has probably 15 buildings on it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, they've told people not to come back, so you drive by that campus and you'll see maybe 10, 15 cars outside each of the buildings, if that many.
Right.
So you see that, but you know the change I think is really interesting there, and one of the persons asked the question about what's the difference between traditional industrial robots and collaborative industrial robots. And really, the traditional robot is usually a fixed installation. It's a repeatable task, and those tasks rarely change. Where and in a traditional robot, the interaction is the worker is only during the programming. The workers are not involved with the industrial robot during its work, and it's really the robots like that need to have fairly medium or large lot size and things. Where collaborative industry robots, they have flexibility. They can relocate, they can change task changes very uh, frequently. They are safe to interact with the worker. There's frequent interaction with the worker. The profitability is really very different. Where the traditional industry robot, you need fairly large lot size. Collaborative robots are profitable even at single lot size. Um, their industrial robots tend to be very fast. Collaborative robots tend to be slower, easy to move, and easy to use, where traditional industry robots are not. So I hope that answers her question that she asked about some of the differences.
Yeah.
Just one thing, like example, when we dependent on robotics, so it's mean that we need very good infrastructure to run this kind of automations, robotics, and these things. Example, what is your advice for developing worlds, for developing this kind of infrastructure, especially for the manufacturing industry?
To me, my advice would be is you really need to stay up to date on what's happening because automation by robots and particularly collaborative robots have changed so dramatically during the last 2 years that what you saw pre-COVID to where we are today is as I hate to use a saying, but almost as different as night and day because they have changed so much. Uh, you see in software the rise of programs that can be automatically generated today where you don't need developers to write a lot of different types of programs. You're seeing the same thing in robots and how those robots are really different and how that can change. Again, if I go back to the industrial robots where you had to have experts come in and program and what do versus collaborative robots, and I'm going to go back to using the Roomba as an example. Uh, you don't have to go in and measure every single inch of your house. You don't have to map out where the furniture is. You don't have to say, I want you to go back and forth here. It will automatically calculate the path it's taking to make sure that every inch that it can reach of that room is vacuumed or mopped. Those are some of the differences and some of the big changes. And for an emerging country trying to move more into manufacturing, they can actually take advantages of some of the learning that has gone on by the robotics in larger uh, countries. And to me, it probably would accelerate their entry into advanced manufacturing because where you see most of the collaborative robots are in industrial robots used in the past was very advanced manufacturing, where today they're being used in more simple. Uh, you know, I hate to use these examples, but Amazon has a huge new distribution center down from me, and there's hundreds of collaborative robots using there to put things in bins, to take things out of bins, to come load them and sort them out to where they're going. After they're sorted, they're putting them on pallets and taking them to the docks, and the robots are actually putting them in the trucks. I tell you what, that task of doing that to me would drive me as a human crazy. And seeing that a collaborative robot is in there doing it, that the humans working with it, every time you do a put or a get with that, humans are involved in that as well. But it's going and doing the lifting. And so instead of having a delivery, a warehouse area where it's human capable all the time, with using the robots, you can actually have a higher density, higher stacking, multiple floors where in the past you tended to get these really wide ones. This new Amazon one down from me is actually a 7 floor warehouse. You don't often see vertical warehouses, but by using collaborative robots, it makes it much easier to do that because it takes out the trouble where a human worker might have a dozen collaborative robots doing stuff in an environment like that. So it's again, it's a new paradigm, but I can see particularly in developing nations, it will be an accelerator for them.
Mr. Martley, what you want to advise, especially for the developing nations, I believe the major challenge is infrastructure.
No, there's no doubt infrastructure, whether it's a developing nation or whether it's a the nation like Malaysia or whether it's a nation like the United States, infrastructure is the main thing, and also making sure that people have access. That's part of the reasons I was asking the questions that I asked of David and everything, because you can have these equipment, you can have these robots, but as long as they are available to the entire population, then they are a more fair tool and things along those lines. But I do agree that even in the sense of the use in the infrastructure, because like I said, there's going to be a big push to build roads here in the United States and also to improve our bridges, some of these roads, including some roads in North Carolina. And I'm not a driver, but even as a passenger, I can tell you that some of these roads are horrendous. So there will be doing some repair work, and I'm sure that the same can be said in Texas, where David is, and in parts of California as well. So definitely there will be a lot of folks that will be trying to repair these roads, and that can be also a hazardous job. And of course, depending on when you're doing it, if you're doing it in the heat of the winter, which we're going to come into, or in the middle of the winter, I should say, when the heat of the summer, that can be something that, like David, I'd rather have a robot doing that versus a human taking those risks and doing that kind of work. And a lot of times, the people that are doing that, and that's actually also going to be an interesting concept, because a lot of times the people that are doing that work are coming from poor nations. Like here in this area, they're coming from Mexico and some of those areas because they don't have opportunities in those countries, and Honduras and other places. But if they don't have the opportunities, and the opportunities are being taken by a robot because the robot is more efficient, that can be a double-edged sword. Because like I said, on one hand, we could be hurting some people that need the jobs, but at the other hand, I am also about safety and us not putting people at undue risk. So like I said, I definitely see the both the benefit and the downfall of that from that standpoint. But definitely that's just something that we'll have to figure out, and figure out some other ways that we can help people from those nations that are near us. There are some nations that are not that are closer to us than even Malaysia is, because Malaysia is all the way on the other side of the world, that are also facing some economic troubles as well, and some of them are right in our backyard. So we have to figure out ways to help them improve their economy, but at the same time realize that we are having a job shift, and that's just something we're going to have to face and try to figure out ways to deal with that. And I know that we're running out of time, and I've actually got to get ready to bounce myself, but I'd love to hear David's thoughts before I get ready to bounce.
Well, let me answer your question, Mark, but then, Sharif, let me also answer the question about how this works in Industry 4.0. But Mark, what you just talked about underscores the fact that we need to have lifelong learning. I
Right.
mean, let's go back here and, let's do agriculture. Agriculture started by people using sticks and stones to work their field and plant crops. And then we began to look at how can we use metal and iron and things to do part of that. Oh, then we put a horse there. And once we put a horse behind those, that eliminated jobs, right? No, it made us more productive and things. And we went from a horse to tractors. And we're now at places where we can have tractors with computers and GPS and things in them become more effective. Oh, I now can use drones as part of my agricultural activity. So that's a great example of where technology, and the definition, Mark, of technology is the application of knowledge to achieve a result. It doesn't have to be a thing. It's the application of knowledge to achieve a result. That's a great example of how by doing things and accepting it, we had to learn new ways. We had to learn new approaches. Where we're going today with the application of things like robotics, the application of artificial intelligence, the application of Internet of Things with sensing, is just the same type of progression that we have done for thousands of years. But we do have to have the lifelong learning to go with it. But there was a question asked earlier about cobots and robots in
Before
Industry
you get to
4.
that, David, I'm gonna have to bounce because I've got to go. But I did want to say I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I look forward to seeing you and Sharif hopefully tomorrow. But I do have to get
Thank
ready,
you.
get out of here.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Martley, for joining today's session. Professor
Thanks, Mark.
David Smith.
So, Sharif, let me answer the question about Industry 4.0. You know, if I look at the usage of cobots, and cobots really supplements the ongoing trend of industrial robots and automated manufacturing technology. And this automated technology is really the Industry 4.0. The Industry 4.0 paradigm promises really the opportunity to achieve efficiencies, cost reduction, increase productivity, and increase flexibility through the integration of these automated systems. And that's what we're seeing here is Industry 4.0 is looking at how do we automate, how do we enhance it, how do we do these efficiencies. And that's where cobotics have really come into play there. And we're seeing this integrated automated systems, and also I love this term, the cyber physical systems beginning to combine. Because when I put cyber digitalization and sensors together with our other things and automate it, it's a digital, physical, digital analog interface. And that is part of what Industry 4.0 really has done. If you look at manufacturing companies today, they're wanting to engage in more flexible production processes. And in the past, you begin to see robots used to do mass production. But what we're seeing today is we're beginning to look at how can we do customization? How can we do mass customization and do it in small batch size? And how do those push there? But this industry shift from Industry 3.0 to 4.0 is from mass production to mass customization. And it's really towards agile manufacturing paradigms. And we see that going through everywhere. And if I go back with what I answered earlier, the difference between traditional industry robots and collaborative industry robots, that trend from going from I'm going to produce millions of exactly the same things to be able to do mass customization and even do one-to-one production and manufacturing runs today is the big elements of where Industry 4.0 is enabling that. So I hope that answered her question.
Mhm. Thank you, Professor. Another thing, because we are actually promoting a World Talent Economy Forum School of Talent Economy, especially for the youth and for the developing nations people. So, what is your advice for STEM, like science, technology, engineering, and management educations? Because this is the key of human resource development. So, how do you want to share your experience? How the youth community will be benefited through this process?
Well, you begin to mention uh, uh, science, technology, engineering, math. I actually think instead of that, it's science, technology, engineering, the arts, and math, because I think it's a STEAM approach. The traditional STEM approach is one that leaves creativity out. And I think you have to put creativity into that. And that's why I'm a proponent of STEAM versus STEM, as you look at how to train, how to educate people. And I think that's very important. As we're seeing some of the big challenges with AI, some of the big challenges with machine learning, some of the big challenges is we actually do look at uh, how you train and work with robots and autonomous vehicles and others. It goes back to the human capability and the human side. And whether we can teach AI ethics, whether we can teach it morality, is one of the places where I think as we train the future scientists, the future engineers, the future mathematicians, uh, that has to come in place. And I think arts is one of the ways you can begin to do that and put those type of values into it. Values are one of the things we actually learned in the past going through college, because oftentimes it wasn't the details of the classes we took. I mean, I took a lot of English and history, uh, and other classes like that, that yes, I used some of it, but it was more about getting through the process and becoming a repeatable process, picking up the values, the culture, and other things like that. That is one of the things I believe in developing nations you need to do with your students today, is teach them this broader range, because most students today spend a lot of time playing MMOs online, so the massive multiplayer games, and they learn things there, but then they lose the essence of privacy. They lose the essence of how do I work collaboratively with other people as people versus playing in the games, where it doesn't hurt if you hurt other people's feelings in the games. The other thing that I found interesting is I'm on a board of an organization called the Human Dimensions of Organizations, which is a master's undergraduate program. And in some of the papers I see from that, it's interesting. Post COVID, they are talking about programs like Microsoft Teams, Zoom, even probably something like SteamYard we're using here, being a form of a collaborative robot. And in some ways, you can almost see that. I mean, Truth, if you think about it, with SteamYard, you can put 10 guests on at a time and you can switch between them. And it does the audio mixing for you in the background. It does the switching of cameras, which are the cameras we have here, and other elements like that. On my system here, I have the ability to switch between three cameras on my computer. And boy, that used to be camera operators, right? And you used to have a control room with people having to use a switcher to do that. And you had an audio guy who was balancing the inputs and adjusting them, where that is now done automatically for us and stuff like this. So even something as soft as Zoom or Microsoft Teams or WebEx or StreamYard, we're seeing the concepts of cobotics. This is a program as opposed to a physical robot, but it does the same type of functions as you see robots do when they're combined in the physical world. So the difference between a digital world and an analog world, a physical world, are really going away as we look at where Industry 4.0 is taking us in the post, and where COVID has pushed us to go even further. So to me, there's great analogies that can be used in either the developed or developing countries around the world.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. Today's session actually excellent for our audience, for our youth community. I request all of our audience please share our content with your government, with your corporation, and with academic, because this is actually priceless. Professor David Smith from industry, he has vast knowledge about industry force, and I think there is a lackings in the developing world. They need expert like you. They need high quality people who can guide the community, who can guide the national communities and develop different policy for industry 4.0. This is our objective. World Talent Economy Forum, we can bring the right kind of people for the right places, and which is really really important for us. Thank you, Professor David Smith, and thank you all of our audience, those who join and continuously support World Talent Economy Forum. Today's session was excellent. Thank you, Professor David Smith,
Thank
for
you.
your contribution. Bye bye and take care.
Bye.